The Rangers crushed the Islanders 9-2, and is there still some hope for Mika Zibanejad?
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1287 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, John Chick. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $250 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So the Rangers, with basically nothing to play for, I know technically they're still alive, but with basically nothing to play for, they come out and they technically go on the road, even though there's a good amount of Ranger fans there as well. And they crushed the Islanders 9-2. Kind of a strange game because Igor Shesterkin still had a very busy night despite that final score. And if you can believe this, this is per Steve Valiquette's Clear Sight Analytics review of the game, where he outlines how many scoring chances each team had. If you can believe this, the Islanders had more expected goals for in this game than the Rangers did. The Rangers clearly benefited from some really subpar goaltending on the Islanders' part. The Islanders, got a decent amount of shots, but obviously Igor was there when the Rangers needed him. The Islanders at the end of this game were projected for 3.24 goals. The Rangers were projected for exactly 3 goals. Only the Rangers could win by 7 goals and still have a situation where it's like, well, if you go by expected goals for, they were actually, trailing the team that they lost to. But you know what? This is a nice win. It's been a season that hasn't had many of those. If nothing else, the Rangers completely dominated the Islanders all season. So I guess, especially if you're an old school Ranger fan, you can kind of hang your hat on that at least a little bit. It's one of the few enjoyable aspects of this Ranger season, their domination of the Islanders. But yeah, again, just kind of a strange game. But regardless, I want to shift our attention quickly here to Mika Zibanejad, talk about his big night, and talk about if there is still any hope left for Mika going forward. Because as we know, that contract still goes on for a very long time. There's still 5 years left on it. Is this in any way salvageable? Is it possible that Mika bounces back with a big season next year? We're going to talk about that. First of all, let me say, we'll get kind of the negative stuff out of the way first. I really have my doubts that that's going to happen, that we're going to look at Mika, what he's doing next year, the year after that, if he's with the Rangers for all that time, and think like, yeah, you know what, he's killing it, and that's money well spent, $8.5 million per season on Mika Zibanejad. And there's a reason, several reasons, in fact, why I feel that way. First of all, the just abysmal start that he had this season, and that's kind of been a theme for Mika. There's been times, even in seasons where he ends up having a mostly good year, he gets off to these just brutally slow starts where he just doesn't look like his head is in the game, and it doesn't look like he's ready to go. And that's, again, kind of been a disturbing trend for Mika over the last handful of seasons here. We've talked about, the lack of intensity that you get from Mika Zibanejad. You'll have scrums on the ice, and he stays far, far away from them. And I know the more recent one that people were complaining about, myself included, there was a situation where the Rangers were already on the power play, and if he jumped into that scrum, the faceoff could have come out of the offensive zone for the Rangers. But at a certain point, who even cares? The power play is so bad anyway. Like, what are the chances that that really made any difference? And there's been other times where that's happened where, the intensity picks up and he just kind of does the bare minimum out there and kind of just avoids the confrontation in general. This next one isn't all Mika Zibanejad, but certainly he has a hand in this. The lack of veteran leadership on this team. Mika is part of that. The veterans, the guys that wear the A's in general, they all have a part of that. The bottom line, this team wasn't happy when they traded their captain. Fine. You know what? Get it out of your system, blow off some steam, do whatever you got to do. But then it's on the alternate captains to step up as leaders for this team going forward, Mika and everybody else included. And if you're not willing to do that, you shouldn't be the alternate captain in the first place. You should not be one of the alternate captains in the first place. And then you get these post-game quotes, which I know, a lot of Ranger fans have really not liked this season, and even in other seasons as well, where a lot of the things that Mika Zibanejad says just kind of come off as making excuses. I don't know that that's really what he's doing, but it certainly reads that way. And when you actually watch and listen to these post-game comments from Mika Zibanejad, they're enough to annoy you and to make you kind of have your opinion of Mika Zibanejad lower, given some of these things that he said after games. Just kind of the attitude of like, oh, well, it just comes off as excuse making a lot of the times. And you just like to see a little bit more fire, a little bit more intensity from a long tenured Ranger and alternate captain such as Mika Zibanejad. So do I see Mika Zibanejad playing like an $8.5 million center next year and the 4 years after that? Because he's got 5 years left on his contract after this one ends. No, I don't. But there is one thing that does give me some hope. And we're going to get to that a little bit later in the episode. In the next segment, going to talk about the one thing that gives me some hope with Mika Zibanejad. I mean, there's some other things, too, that give me some hope, but there's one big one, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But I want to go through his game here in this one first. He did have a strong game last night against the Islanders. Most of the Rangers did, especially the forwards and the guys that are counted on to contribute offensively. But Mika ends up with the goal and the assist. This is one game after he had 4 assists, so 6 points in the last 2 games for Mika Zibanejad. And he had a big hand in the Rangers' first 2 goals of this game, the goals that kind of set the tone for this contest. Goes 1-0 Rangers, relatively early in the game, just a couple of minutes in. You get a steal by JT Miller in the neutral zone, up to Mika. Mika immediately tips it back to JT Miller. JT then gives it to Will Cooley. Cooley's going up the left side, kind of like veering to his left there, and he passes behind the back to JT Miller. And then Miller is able to drive to the center of the ice and pass to his right to Mika Zibanejad. Mika had an open shooting lane, and he let it fly and did not miss. Just beautiful puck movement here by this line. These 3 really had a strong game together. And isn't that crazy? An early goal in a Ranger game that was scored by the Rangers. Wasn't that fun? And again, kind of a tone setter for this game. Then you get the goal that makes it 2-0. Mika on this play. Actually, it all started with Mika making a nice play in the defensive zone. The Islanders were trying to get to the front of the Ranger net, and Mika, with a good stick, able to poke the puck away. And then we've got JT Miller going through the neutral zone. He passes to Mika over the blue line on the right side. Mika goes up the right side, delays for just a second. You've got JT Miller crashing the net and kind of drawing some attention along with him. And then Mika makes the pass to Miller. The save is made, but Cooley is able to bury the rebound. And in just a second, a little bit of a spoiler here, the thing that gives me hope with Mika Zibanejad that I'm going to talk about in greater detail in just a minute is his play with JT Miller. It certainly has improved. And I was going to say, keep Mika and JT together for next season. And certainly I do think that that's what they should do. Keep all 3 of these guys together. Keep Will Cooley there as well. Because I think playing with guys like this that play the game with a certain amount of physicality, a certain amount of intensity, Cooley and Miller, that'll keep Mika Zibanejad honest. And I think you'll get the best out of Mika Zibanejad if he's playing with guys like this. Not to mention the fact that they're just, very good players to begin with. Obviously, JT Miller, quite a bit more established in his NHL career than Will Cooley. But Will Cooley is a fast riser for this Ranger team, has a real chance to become one of the few and far between homegrown success stories for this Ranger franchise. And I think putting Mika out there with the 2 of them for the last 3 games of this season, very likely, and then certainly to start next season as well. I think that bodes well for Mika Zibanejad, and that gives you the best chance possible to get the most that you can possibly get out of Mika Zibanejad at this point. But we're going to talk about that in greater detail in just a second. We're going to talk about this idea, elaborate on this idea of keeping Mika Zibanejad together with JT Miller, and I'm also going to have some thoughts at the end of today's episode. Peter Laviolette making not just Gabe Perreault a healthy scratch, but now also Brennan Othmann. To me, it just doesn't make any sense, but I'll have more details on that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are almost here, and so are the Stanley Cup playoffs. And FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in on the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you will get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. FanDuel makes betting very easy, whether it's picking your favorite team or diving into the player props. From 3-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same game parlay for a chance to win big. Don't miss out. Head over to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. All right, let's go keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. Huge shout out to the everydayers. As always, thank you for sticking with this team throughout the entire season. Definitely stick around once the season ends as well, because we're going to be diving into, first thing we got to do is basically perform an autopsy on everything that went wrong with this Ranger team this season. But then we're going to turn our attention to things like the draft, free agency, how to fix this team, possible tradings of guys like Keandre Miller, Chris Kreider, other guys who could be on the block for this Ranger team. So we'll have all that to look forward to. But in our next episode, going to be breaking down whatever happens between the Rangers and Canes. They play each other at 3 o'clock on Saturday. Rangers are technically still alive, but that could change as soon as later tonight because the Canadiens play the Ottawa Senators. And if the Canadiens win that game or lose in overtime, then the Rangers are done. But let's just do one final, possibly final playoff scenario for the Rangers, just to kind of humor ourselves and just kind of explain to everybody where things stand. And some of you might be aware of this, some of you might not be. But this is what needs to happen if anybody's still clinging to that belief that there's going to be a miracle and the Rangers get in. This is all that needs to happen, right? The Rangers need to win their last 3 games. I don't think that's going to happen, but let's just say it does. They need that to happen first and foremost. That's what they can control. They also must have the Montreal Canadiens lose their last 4 games, and all 4 of those losses have to be in regulation. If even a single Montreal Canadian game makes it into overtime, then the Rangers season is over. And on top of all that, they would also, the Rangers, need to have the Blue Jackets get 6 points or fewer in their last 4 games combined. If the Blue Jackets get 7 points or 8 points, the Rangers cannot make the playoffs in that scenario either, because that would put the Blue Jackets ahead of the Rangers, even if the Rangers, win out. But anyway, that's out of the way. You got all that? Regardless, let's snap back to reality here and the reality that the Rangers will not be going to the playoffs. I want to shift our attention, actually keep talking about Mika Zibanejad here, and what does kind of give me some hope going forward. And I did kind of spoil it in the last segment there, but the thing that really gives me hope is that Mika Zibanejad, undeniably, unquestionably, has been a far better player this season when he's been on the same line with JT Miller than when he has not been on the same line with JT Miller. It's noticeable in his stats. It's also noticeable with the eye test. He's been a far more physical player. We've seen him go in the forecheck and level people against the boards. It doesn't happen that often, but it wasn't happening at all before the acquisition of JT Miller. We've seen it at least a couple of times since JT Miller got here. And that's not to say that Mika's been perfect since JT has gotten back with the Rangers, but he just seems a little bit more mentally engaged, just seems to have his head in the game a little bit more of a high motor. And like I said, at least a little bit of an improvement in terms of the physical play. And certainly, you look at the stats, he's producing a heck of a lot more offensively as well. Did the move from center to wing help him out at all? I mean, that's possible too. Maybe he's better suited for the wing going forward. And regardless of whether that's true or not, the simple fact is he's played far better with JT Miller. And Miller can play all the different positions too. He can play all 3 forward positions. But to me, this is what seems to be clicking. And I think JT Miller at center makes more sense than Mika Zibanejad at center. But regardless, keep these 2 together. And as far as like point totals and the jump that we've seen from Mika Zibanejad, again, the last couple of games really stand out. 6 points for Mika Zibanejad in the last 2 games combined. But also, and part of this is before JT Miller even got here, Mika Zibanejad has 37 points in 43 games in 2025. And keep in mind, this is while most of the team has been a complete dumpster fire. So it's nice to see that Mika Zibanejad is still, getting after it and finding out a way to contribute offensively, at least a heck of a lot more in 2025 than he did in 2024. But it's funny because, when the Rangers acquired JT Miller, there were some mixed feelings. I feel like most Ranger fans were on board because most Ranger fans felt, and I would agree, that this is a team that just needed to switch up the mental makeup a little bit. They needed somebody that plays a little bit more intensity, a little bit more fire than a lot of these current Ranger veterans obviously play with. And JT Miller fits that description to a T. Also, you throw in the fact that I think the price is more than fair. Nothing against Filipino, nothing against Victor Mancini, nothing against the first-round draft pick, whoever that turns out to be. But I think that price was more than reasonable to bring in a JT Miller. And it worked out with the Rangers, obviously, that this is where JT wanted to go. But bottom line, it's probably too early right now to really, we could try this in a future episode. Maybe when the season ends, we'll do this. I think it's a little too early to start penciling in all the different line combinations, all the different defense pairings next year, because we don't even know who's going to be here, who's going to leave in free agency, who's going to come in free agency, who are the Rangers going to trade away, who are they going to trade for. It's difficult to figure that out, but it's also very difficult to envision a scenario where JT Miller, Will Cooley, and Mika Zibanejad are not on this team next year. And there's always that possibility that they could trade Mika Zibanejad if he's willing to waive his no move. And if he is willing to waive that, and if there is a team willing to bring him in, which I don't think there really will be given his contract, then certainly I think that's an idea that the Rangers should explore, and I would actually prefer that option. But the bottom line, they're probably stuck with Mika Zibanejad. Like, there's not really any nice way to say it. But if you want to get the absolute most out of him, like I mentioned earlier in the episode, you put him out there with two high-intensity, highly physical players in JT Miller and Will Cooley, and that'll keep Mika Zibanejad honest. Certainly more honest than he had been, playing with guys like Chris Kreider, and even, we could go through the list, but playing with those types of players, I think that's going to get the most out of Mika Zibanejad. So we'll see how it goes, but might as well do this too, in fact. Keep Mika Zibanejad and JT Miller not just together at the start of next season, keep them together through the entire offseason here. Just make Mika Zibanejad follow JT Miller around for the next handful of months here. Obviously, Mika, we mentioned this earlier, he tends to get off to slow starts every season, and I just feel like having him with JT Miller right from the start of the next campaign, that's going to obviously bode well for Mika Zibanejad. And Mika needs to take this upon himself too. And if he's with JT Miller for the entire offseason, make them train together or have them train together. They were teammates back in the day, and they're back together now, and it seems to be working, the two of them together. Mika Zibanejad, one of the biggest things he has to do going into next season is make sure that he is ready to go. Physically, mentally, spiritually, do whatever you got to do. Make sure you are ready to hit the ground running next season. And, you'll have Ranger fans that get upset or annoyed or just downright angry at the fact that Mika Zibanejad is like a part-time DJ in the offseason. I've never cared about that. He can do whatever he wants. And then there's people, and these people are way out of line when they say things like this, but they actually get mad at Mika Zibanejad for starting a family. If you're one of those people, seek help, okay? And do it sooner rather than later. But the bottom line, Mika's allowed to do these things. He's allowed to start a family. He's allowed to have an off-season hobby and being a DJ if that's what he wants to do. But he also has to commit to the game of hockey and make sure that he's ready to go in every possible way at the start of a season. Because like I mentioned earlier, the slow starts, the lackluster starts, the starts where it just seems like he's kind of gasping for air and maybe not as well conditioned as some of his teammates or some of his opponents, that needs to change. He's got to not start doing hockey stuff when they report for training camp. That's got to begin before that. And, hopefully that can begin this upcoming season. Hopefully this current season is teaching Mika Zibanejad that lesson that I got to make sure I'm ready to go in every possible way, because I do think Mika's going to be back next year. I get the feeling that the Rangers, decent chance that they'll approach him about maybe waiving that no move clause. But again, he's under no obligation to do it. He seems to like being in New York. He's got his family here now, obviously. I don't think he's going anywhere. I think guys like Chris Kreider, I think for sure is getting traded, assuming they can find somebody to take him, even if it's a glorified salary dump. Keandre Miller, I get the feeling he's going to be on his way in a trade as well, and you can get a lot for Keandre Miller. So I think there's a good amount of reasons to do that. We've talked about that in recent episodes. As for Mika, though, this is kind of like, the three Ranger players that a lot of fans want them to move on from. I think Kreider's gone. I think Keandre Miller is gone. I don't think Mika Zibanejad's going anywhere. We'll see. I could be wrong. Maybe Mika wants a fresh start somewhere, and maybe I'm underestimating his market, and there are teams that would be interested in acquiring him. I'm very skeptical that all those things will happen, though. And I think Mika's going to be back. And again, I don't know that you'll ever get him playing like an $8.5 million center again. But if you want to try to salvage this contract, if you want to try to salvage the rest of Mika Zibanejad's run with the New York Rangers, put him on the same line with JT Miller. Keep those two connected at the hip. Make them hang out off the ice, do whatever you got to do, because I think that Miller's style of play is rubbed off on Mika Zibanejad, and in a good way. And while we're at it, like I said, keep Will Cooley with the two of them as well. That line looked great last night, and I think that that's just a good line in general. But more than anything, those two guys will get the absolute most out of Mika. So going to keep everything rolling in just a second. We got to shift our attention to this, wonderful pregame decision by Peter Laviolette to scratch both of the Ranger first-round players. We will get to that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Gametime. There is nothing like the energy of a live game, whether it's catching a last-minute MLB showdown or soaking in the excitement of an NBA or NHL matchup. But finding great seats at a great price, that used to be a challenge until there was Gametime. Gametime makes scoring last-minute tickets easier than ever. Prices actually drop as the event gets closer. And with their all-in pricing, you see the total cost up front. No surprises at checkout. You've got priority last-minute deals. You can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. You can also grab last-minute seats for the Rangers and save big with their zone deals. Peace of mind. With seat views before you buy, no surprise fees, and a lowest price guarantee, you can book with total confidence. Their lowest price guarantee means you never have to worry about overpaying. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, let's go ahead and wrap up today's episode by talking a little bit about this decision by Peter Laviolette, controversial decision, just borderline infuriating decision to scratch Gabe Perreault and Brennan Othmann before this game. Now, in a way, everything worked out because they won 9-2, but let me just say this. Because one of the guys that kind of was targeted probably by myself and a lot of other Ranger fans before this game was Juuso Parssinen. Parssinen had been a healthy scratch for 6 games in a row. Peter Laviolette, for some reason, decides he needs to put him back in there for this game against the Islanders. Now, Parssinen had a big game last night, as did a lot of the Ranger players. Parssinen was centering the third line with Kreider and Lafreniere. We saw Parssinen score on a wraparound. He also had a secondary assist on an Alexis Lafreniere goal that made it 8-2. And then you had that weird goal right at the very end scored by Panarin where, there's a board battle behind the Islander net. Parssinen gets his stick on it. It goes to Panarin. Panarin tries to basically just throw it in front of the net, deflects off the goalie, goes in, makes it 9-2. So those are Parssinen's first 3 points as a Ranger, and good for Parssinen. And I mean that genuinely. I'm very happy for him. This is somebody that has a difficult time cracking and staying in an NHL lineup. He's got his work cut out for him to do that with the Rangers if that's where he is next season. If I'm not mistaken, he's an RFA with arbitration rights when this season ends, so there's a decent chance that he'll be back. We will see. And it's all well and good that he had a good game here. Again, good for him. But to me, in what is essentially a lost season, a miserable season, if we're being completely honest here, I've been saying this, one of the worst seasons in franchise history when you put the expectations up against the results. Best record in the NHL last year, 2 games from the Cup final. You guys know the drill. And this year just largely sputtering and frankly embarrassing themselves with some of these efforts that we've seen in some of these games. So considering that that's the case, how does it make any sense to play a guy in Juuso Parssinen? And again, I know he had a good game, good for him. But how does it make any sense to prioritize somebody like that, who was a trade deadline throw-in, over 2 of your first-round draft picks, and the 2 guys in Gabe Perreault and Brennan Othmann that are largely considered the 2 best prospects in the Rangers system? I don't even really know that it's that close. I know that as far as defensemen go, Fortescue and Emery, there's high hopes for the 2 of them. I don't know that either of them has a massively high ceiling. Gabe Perreault has a massively high ceiling, and Othmann's might not be quite as high, but you've got, overall somebody that's a well-rounded player. He can snipe. I know the points haven't been there for Othmann, but that's why you give him these games and you get him some experience at the NHL level. Perreault can snipe and he can play with some snarl and some physicality that is sorely needed as well. So to me, it just doesn't make any sense to go with somebody like Parssinen over either of the 2 of them. I think that Perreault and Othmann should both be playing every game down the stretch here. And, as far as other guys that you could take out of the lineup, I would start with Parssinen, and that makes room for, let's just say, Perreault. And then you have to take out somebody else and put in Othmann. There are some other options here. You can scratch Kreider and just say that, we're shutting him down because his back has been killing him all season, and there's no point in pushing through this. And that would at least allow Kreider to save face a little bit, which might be more than he deserves, if we're being totally honest here. He was a healthy scratch one time earlier this season, but you could at least avoid that kind of PR nightmare of making Kreider a healthy scratch for the final 3 or 4 games, now down to 3 games. If you just say, you know what, it's his back, it's killing him, it's been a long season, we're going to shut him down. You could also scratch Matt Rempe. I like Rempe. I think that he has played his role just fine this season, and I think he has improved this year from last year. One of the few guys that I think mostly gives you an honest effort every single night. But with this team essentially out of the playoff chase, and again, I know they're technically in it, but essentially out of the playoff chase, Rempe's importance, Rempe's purpose for being in the lineup goes down quite a bit, because Rempe is out there to spark his team and bring some energy and bring some physicality and be a deterrent and all this stuff. We've seen all season, there's not really a whole lot that can spark this Ranger team. And if the Rangers become mathematically eliminated, then I don't really see what the point is of Matt Rempe playing in the rest of these games. I mean, I know he's still a young player and he's working on some things and he's developing, but he's played enough games this season where I think he'll be okay. It'd be okay if he was a healthy scratch at the end of the season if you're going to make room for guys like Perreault and Othmann. You could sit Lafreniere for a game. I mean, they're not going to do that, and Lafreniere actually scored in this game last night, so that's also an option. And even Sam Carrick. Carrick has had a nice season as somebody who, again, one of the few players that brings the effort. But Carrick, we know what he is. He's a guy that is a bottom sixer, and in a perfect world should probably be centering the fourth line rather than the third line. We've seen him at the third line a couple of times this season. It's not going to be the end of the world if Carrick is a healthy scratch for 1 or 2 games at the very end. He'll be back with the team next season. He'll be in that fourth line role and probably doing a good job at it. But if it means that that's what it takes to get Perreault or Othmann into the lineup, making Carrick a healthy scratch for the first time all season, that's fine too. There's nothing that's going to, be the end of the world if Sam Carrick doesn't play in one of these last couple of games here for the Rangers. So to me, it just doesn't really make any sense. And the Rangers have really come under fire from a lot of fans, myself included, I'm sure a lot of you guys as well, for their inability and at times, honestly, even their unwillingness to develop their prospects. Whether it's a situation where the Rangers draft guys that they never should have drafted in the first place, whether that's Nils Lundkvist, whether that's Vitaly Kravtsov, Lias Andersson. I mean, those guys might have been a lost cause from the start. But then you've got guys that, do make some contributions at the Rangers draft, their homegrown talents, but they never become all that they could be, whether that's Lafreniere, Kakko, Hedel, Keandre Miller. You could certainly throw him into that mix as well. The Rangers have come under fire for this, for their inability to commit to these young players and put them in a situation to succeed, develop them in a meaningful way where they can become big-time contributors for this team, where they can become cornerstones of this franchise. A lot of Ranger fans have really voiced their frustration in that regard to how it's gone with the Ranger prospects, and I don't blame them because the proof is in the pudding. The Rangers just are not getting enough out of their homegrown guys, their top prospects. So, I don't know. To me, it just doesn't make any sense. And there might be some people that say, well, Perreault, he doesn't have any points in his first 3 games. It doesn't matter. This is where he signed his ELC. Again, in a perfect world, maybe he waits until next season so you don't have to burn a year, but he signed it. He's here. You might as well make the most of it and get him a taste of NHL action down the stretch here. And it's kind of the same thing with Brennan Othmann. I mean, different situation. He's been with the team for most of the entire season, or at least after he got called up. He should be playing too, because this is developing for the future and getting ready to go. And there were also some people, not many, but there were a couple of people that were actually defending Laviolette's decision to make Gabe Perreault a healthy scratch. And that's fine. Certainly I respect everybody's opinion on the matter. But there's people that say like, well, it's not uncommon for a player that signs his ELC this late in the season to be a healthy scratch for a game. Because in theory, they can watch from the press box and learn some things and work with the coaches and watch tape and all that stuff. And you don't want to overwhelm them right out of the gate here. And there is some truth to that. But, what about 2 games in a row for Gabe Perreault? You want to do that for 1 game? I don't agree with it, but I'll live with it. What about 2 straight games of making Gabe Perreault a healthy scratch? What sense does that make? We're really going to do this. We're really going to act like this is a good thing for Gabe Perreault. And in all likelihood, it's going to end up being 3 straight games because the Rangers just won this game. And if Laviolette wants to sit Gabe Perreault with the season on the line in this game, then what makes us think that he's not going to do the exact same thing on Saturday when the Rangers season will possibly still be on the line? It depends what happens with Montreal later tonight. See, that's the thing too. If Montreal gets a point or 2 points in this game tonight and finally ends this thing and finally puts the Rangers out of their misery this season, then Gabe Perreault needs to be in the lineup on Saturday. There's literally They are literally out of reasons to not do it, to not put the kids in the lineup, to not give them meaningful minutes, and maybe not even give them a look on the top power play unit as well. I would like to see those changes made. I don't think they will be, but, we can dream at least, right? And one more point that I'll make as far as like Gabe Perreault and making him a healthy scratch. What about Ryan Leonard? Ryan Leonard was Gabe's teammate at BC. They were actually on the same line, more often than not. Ryan Leonard has played in all 5 Caps games since he got here. And the Capitals, mind you, have the best record in the Eastern Conference. This is a team that's preparing and gearing up to go on a big-time Stanley Cup playoff run. They're not, that core of players, they're getting a little bit older. They got some young talent in there now as well, but I'm talking mostly about Ovechkin and Karlsson for sure. Ovechkin, this might be his last chance to win a Stanley Cup. And nevertheless, they're taking this kid Leonard, who might not have even been alive when Alex Ovechkin made his NHL debut. I'd have to look at that. If he was, it was just barely. And they're throwing him right out there. And they're letting him, kind of learn the ropes a little bit here. They're letting him go through, some growing pains. It's not like Leonard has lit up the score sheet with the Capitals. He's got 1 goal and no assists in his first 5 games, but they still recognize that this kid can help us. And if the Capitals can throw this kid right into the middle of a chase for the Stanley Cup, then why can't the Rangers let Gabe Perreault play some games at the end of the season that are probably going to be meaningless, assuming that the Canadiens get 1 more point or the Rangers miss out on 1 more point, the games will be meaningless. They can't do that. The Capitals, up until I think just this last game, had Leonard playing in the top 6. They since moved him to the third line, and that's fine, and maybe that's the way for them to go. I haven't watched their games, so I don't know for sure. But again, just the complete polar differences in philosophy of how to treat a young player, how to treat a young, exciting player who just signed his ELC, who just got to the NHL, who you believe can help your team. It's just a complete 180 from the Capitals to the Rangers. And again, the Capitals are the team that have everything on the line going forward here. They're the team that's going to be in the playoffs and the team trying to win a Stanley Cup, and they trust their player in that situation more than the Rangers trust their guy in a situation where these games, again, will end up probably being meaningless. So, I don't know. Can't make any sense out of it. We'll see what the Rangers do with their lineup in the next one, but we'll call it there. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @jchick17. Once again, that is @jchik17, and definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.